Okay, welcome to lesson 2 of my project for Flip Your Classroom for using integrated software across the curriculum. I'm William Sorrentino, and we're talking about the basics of cartooning. In lesson 1, we talked about form, line, and shape. And we used form, line, and shape to create something called a frame. Alright, we are cartooning a humanoid type figure here, so our frame reflects that. And in lesson 2, I'd like to talk about proportion to start with. Now, proportion is the relative size of one thing to another thing within a certain context. And in this particular context, it's the context of our drawing, so the proportion is how things look size-wise. Now, the great thing about cartooning is that proportion doesn't necessarily have to remain realistic. Now, if we were drawing in a realistic style, that is something that is meant to be taken in the same view that you would see it in real life, then proportion has to be perfect. Now, in the case of cartooning, proportion doesn't have to be perfect, okay? Cartooning allows for like a big head on a tiny body or an enormous body, like a really little tiny head. Okay, so proportion is all about the artist's vision. And in this particular case, we're going to keep it pretty simple and pretty realistic as far as the proportions of a human body go. My mother, who was an art teacher for many, many, many years, used to say that there's an old rule about 7 heads. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 heads equal the correct proportion for a body. Okay, so if we're going to draw something that's somewhat proportional, then we need to think about what we're drawing. And in lesson 1, we talked about coming up with the who and the what, not necessarily the where and the when yet, but we talked about the who and the what, and we know that we're going to draw a humanoid figure. I said that I was going to draw a zombie because zombies are topical, and I like to draw them. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about what our character should look like. Now, we have our frame, so we know the upper body is generally going to be in this area, and the lower body is generally going to be in this area. And upon setting out, we should have a clear idea kind of what we're going to draw. Now, I'm going to draw a character here, a humanoid character, so I'm going to start to fill in around the frame. So I know humans have a neck, and they've got shoulders, and they've got arms, and again, I'm softening the lines that we created. Now, we created very straight lines in our form, in our frame, and in order to turn it into something a little cartoony, I'm going to soften the lines and use a little bit of a curve. Now, my character is going to be wearing a shirt, so I'm going to start to put the lines in for the shirt. Now, it's okay if you don't know how to draw a shirt. That's the whole point of practicing and learning. And we're going to soften our lines up here a little bit and to kind of make a wrist, elbow type area, and some kind of pants. I guess we'll put them in shorts. Now, if you're practicing with a pencil, the great thing about it is after you have something where you want it, you can go back and erase your frame lines, which is good. It works kind of the same way here on my whiteboard, but it's a little messier. So I'm going to erase the lines that I don't really need to leave the lines that I do need. Now, I always recommend going over everything with a Sharpie pen or a felt tip marker when you're finally done. That way it leaves your lines clearly defined. But for our purposes, we're not going to do that. Okay. So you can see we're using our frame. Now, the reason I drew this cross into our head frame is because, getting back to proportion, the human face has certain proportions to it, okay? If you can imagine a line down the center of my face, we have symmetry, so we've got an eye on each side, the nose in the middle, the lips is directly proportionate, the same proportion to each side, and ears. Now, if you look at the human face, your ears are perfectly in line with your eyes, and that's where our frame comes in. So we're going to take our basic head shape here, which, you know, I've made an oval, but a head shape doesn't necessarily have to be an oval. You can make any kind of head shape you want. I mean, you can make a triangular head if you so desire, as long as you keep your frame of reference in the middle. And I'm going to add my ears, and let's see, we're going to put very simple eyes because this is, after all, a basics course. and we're going to put a nose, and we're going to put some kind of monstery mouth. So basically we've used our frame and our lines to create proportion. Alright, so this particular cartoon is vaguely proportionally correct. Once we have our lines in place, you can go ahead and, once we have our features in place, you can go ahead and you can erase your frame lines, and then what you're left with is something that should be proportionally correct, or at least proportionally correct to your drawing. Okay? Now, as far as shorts go, let's see. They can be long, a little bit like board shorts, or add a pocket and they become cargo pants. But anyway, the point is that what I'd like to strive here is proportion. We're talking about proportion. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about in our drawing course here is the idea of perspective. All right, we're going to gain a little perspective. Now, perspective is simply differentiating between the background and the foreground. Now, our picture here gives no indication of background or foreground. So we're going to have to add another line. Okay, we're going to add another line across the back, and this becomes known as the horizon line. All right, so I'm going to write horizon. Horizon. Alright, this is our horizon line. Now the horizon is as far as you can see in real life, so the horizon line in our drawing is as far as we can see. And the point of the horizon line is to add the element of depth to your drawing. So now we know that our character is standing in what's called the foreground. So this area that's closest to the viewer is the foreground, and this area that's farthest away is the background. Alright, now, because we have a foreground and because we have a background, we now have perspective. So if I draw something here in the background, I'm just, you know what, I'm going to draw a trash can. Okay? It's in the background. It's not very big. The perspective tells us that this is a very far, far away trash can. And in the front here, for argument's sake, I'm going to draw another trash can, okay, which, again, is correct in proportion to the character, or at least near enough. Okay, so we can look at this, and here's some flies and some smell lines because it's summer. Okay, so we can look at this trash can, and we can say, this trash can is is closer to the viewer, and therefore it gives a better sense of proportion. So we have our background and our foreground, and that is our perspective of this drawing. Okay, so what we're going to do, now that we have a little bit of insight into perspective, is in the next video lesson, we're going to talk about light, shadow, and detail. Okay, so once again, make sure you practice a lot. Make sure you practice turning your frame into some kind of form that has proportion, and make sure when you're practicing you're adding a horizon line so that you can tell what items are in the background and what items are in the foreground. And as always, try to challenge yourself. If you find that this is coming very easily to yourself, then pick a different form, something that you're perhaps unfamiliar or uncomfortable with, just to give it a try. And I will see you for lesson 3.